This will not be easy. It's difficult to forge a lasting partnership between former adversaries. It's hard to change habits that have been ingrained in our governments and our bureaucracies for decades. But I believe that on the fundamental issues that will shape this century, Americans and Russians share common interests that form a basis for cooperation.
Welcome back to Morning Joe. Here with us now, Adjunct Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and former Foreign Policy Advisor in the Bush administration, Dan Senor. And in Washington, former U.S. Ambassador to Russia, James Collins, who's now Director of the Russia and Eurasia Program at the Carnegie Endowment of International Peace. What a great panel. Thank you very much for joining us, along with Maria Bartiromo and Carlos Watson. Dan, I don't know, Chris, if you can pull up the shot of President Obama and Vladimir Putin, I believe, where the body language, they sit down, and Dan, it just seems like, Obama cares more.
Well, no, you can see it. Yeah,
I can see it. There you go.
Yeah, I would say one of the challenges for Obama on this trip was to build up Medvedev. It was very important that he have the big event yesterday with Medvedev, the long meeting, the press conference, and today, oh, by the way, breakfast with Putin. It was supposed to be an hour, it went on being 2 hours. I actually think in the eyes of the Russian people it is important for... Keep in mind, Medvedev is not from the Soviet era, so to speak. He didn't work in the KGB like Putin did.
Right.
He actually has experience in the private sector.
Right.
He is the sort of person who should be building up, in addition to the opposition, the Democratic opposition, who, to Obama's credit, he met with. I personally would have scrapped the Putin meeting, or actually not done it for the cameras.
Interesting. Perfect segue to James Collins, and former U.S. Ambassador to Russia. You would have insight, but how would you describe the balance of power in Russia, and then how President Obama needs to be approaching this? Because it's one thing to see into someone's soul. It's another thing to actually get something substantive done that lasts a long time.
Well, personally, I don't think any American president can go to Russia and not deal with the Russian government. And right now, the Russian government has a dual leadership. So I don't think it's all that strange or even, to say the least, inappropriate that he would, in fact, meet mostly with Putin, who is his counterpart, or with Medvedev, who is his counterpart, and then also see former President and now Prime Minister Putin. Makes a lot of sense to me. And everyone in Russia believes that both leaders are critical to the decision-making in that country.
Yeah, Maria Bartiromo, yeah?
I agree with that. That the Russian people believe that Putin still holds an enormous amount of influence and power, so that is just the fact. I think the most important thing between Russia and the United States is for the people of America and the world to believe that there is a rule of law in Russia. One of the biggest issues that country faces right now, with the economy in shambles, with oil having come down so much from the highs, we need to believe that, in fact, the rules will not be changed in the middle of the game. And that goes to whether foreign investment's coming in or whether we're talking about nuclear proliferation and really the belief that we're actually going to do something. People don't believe that actually the rule of law is in place.
Okay, so Dan and then James Collins, please follow up right away. How do you actually execute that? How do you approach it?
This is an enormously important point. President Obama, a couple days before he went to Moscow, gave an interview with one of the opposition newspapers in Russia. And he actually was critical of the imprisonment of Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who's an oil tycoon who funded the Democratic opposition in Russia 6 years ago, and as a result of that was put in prison on these bogus, trumped-up charges. They basically nationalized his oil company and
stripped him of all his assets.
Exactly, and this is why people are uneasy about doing business in Russia. And just Obama speaking out, just him putting a spotlight on it. Khodorkovsky's father gave an interview, and he said just the President of the United States expressing interest in this issue puts pressure on the Russian government to give him some sort of pardon.
Ambassador Collins, do you agree?
Well, I think it's clear that in his speech, for instance, President Obama made it very clear that the United States believes observing rule of law, democratic values and principles and so forth is critical if you're going to have an effective and functioning society. He said, we believe in these values because they work. they're also human values. But I think what was interesting to me is that when in his speech he did what I hoped he would do. He talked to the next generation. He said, you have decisions to make about your future. We're not interested in a confrontation with you. That's something of the past. But we do have certain things we can cooperate on, and he listed them. Controlling nuclear weapons, reducing them, fighting the challenges of extremism, building a prosperous economy for everyone, protecting sovereignty, and so forth. I thought he was actually extremely effective in what he said. And finally, with President Medvedev, after all, he made some very significant progress on tangible agreements. We shouldn't minimize these. They're important.
All right, James Collins, thanks very much. Dan Senor, thank you.
Good to be with you.